Good evening and welcome to Open Line. Tonight we are discussing how to talk to your kids about school shootings. If you have any questions or would like to share even your experience, feel free to call the line there on your screen, 615-737+. And with me right now is psychologist Dr. Anna Settle. How much does media, I know someone commented on our Facebook live stream, by the way, if you know someone who might want to watch this, it's streaming on NewsChannel 5 Nashville's Facebook page. Video games, exposure to all of that. People are saying there's just so much violence on TV, video games that they're playing. What do you say to that? How much does that really play a factor?
We do have some hard and fast data that show that violent video games do contribute to violent behavior. So there is some merit to that. I also think, when we're watching violence on the news, it's normalizing it. And so, when children are watching that or teens are watching that, it certainly makes them less affected by it. And so they're more likely to engage in violent acts.
When things get so normalized, or people say we just get desensitized to things, does that change the approach to what you do in your job?
It does, because there are other factors that come up when you're treating someone when they are feeling like certain behaviors are normal that are certainly abnormal. They're really just, and so going back to the question about violence and media, they're just a confluence of variables that come together that make somebody at risk for actually carrying out that violence. So not just playing video games, it's not necessarily going to make somebody more apt to do it.
Right,
so
it's not like video games equals this.
Right, and if somebody comes in and is coming into me for treatment, that's not necessarily the first question I ask. It's not a huge red flag, but certainly that coupled with, a student's been ostracized, or, the girlfriend has broken up with him, or mom or dad is experiencing financial distress. Those kinds of things can sort of all marry together to make somebody much more at risk and apt to carry those things out. Even
if your child has not gone through the traumatic event, per se, school shootings, is it still wise for parents to talk to their kids, regardless if they have not gone through a traumatic experience?
Yes, absolutely, because they are going to hear about it. As much as we feel like we can shield even small children from conversations or from television, they will overhear it. And so it's so important to talk to them so that they're not trying to fill in the blanks and narrate their own story about what happened.
How dangerous can that be, that narration of stories?
It can be very dangerous, because if they don't fully understand what's going on and they're trying to come up with a rationale for why it happened, you can imagine a 7-year-old rationale for why someone walks in and shoots someone at school. Is probably not going to be one that you want them to be walking around with. You want them to understand that while this happened, we're going to keep them safe, but they don't have that piece of it if we're not sharing that with them.
You have an 8-year-old kid. Have you ever talked to them about something like this? Hopefully, unfortunately, nowadays it seems like you have to, but what do you say to someone as young as 7 or as young as 8 who see this on the news?
Well, first of all, I'm a psychologist, and so I want to say that it's probably easier for someone who's been trained to have a conversation that sounds pretty good. But parents can just listen, first of all, ask the question, have you heard about what happened? And, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, well, someone on the bus mentioned this, or I overheard somebody talking about this. So the first thing to do is to listen to them and sort of see where they are and what narrative they've already created. And then, again, to ensure the safety piece, to say, we're going to keep you safe. Here is what happened. You don't have to explain it to someone who's under 6. You don't have to give details about what happened, but you can say, something happened at a school that was unsafe. If you hear about that, please come and talk to me or ask me questions about it.
Keep that line of communication very, very open.
Right, and even if they don't want to talk about it, bring it up again, especially with adolescents, because they will minimize and say, oh, no big deal, but then it's definitely on their minds.
Wow, okay, so we have Adam on the line. Adam, hey, good evening, what's your question?
What's that?
Hey, Adam, what's your question?
I got a question about the school shootings and how much training kids are getting with the school shootings.
Anything specific regarding that?
That's a good question, and I think that probably varies by school district, but certainly now they're having intruder drills, and so just as they would have inclement weather drills or fire drills, students are being taught how to sort of fade into furniture so that they can't be noticed when somebody walks into the room, and I'm talking about kindergartners. So we are definitely talking about it and recognizing that the risk actually is there.
And to add on to that question, Adam, like you said, it all depends on the school district. But by all means, this is most likely on a lot of school officials' minds anyways, especially with what happened in Benton, and specifically in Benton. What was very interesting is the commissioner of the Kentucky State Police there. He says just actually recently, just before that shooting, they did hold an active shooter training in Marshall County. So safe to say that was fresh on people's minds, and that I'm sure played a huge factor in hopefully preventing even more children and even more students from getting hurt. But I know in Wilson County, just throughout the mid-state, people have taken initiative to at least do school shooter trainings. To say each school, I mean, it all depends, but not even schools, but also churches, for instance. That's been a very proactive step for a lot of school officials. That's a very good question, because again, it seems like we're hearing more of these stories, even in California. From what we understand, there was some type of shooting. A teenager was taken into custody by LA police. We understand 4 students were involved in the shooting. So even in California, as early as February, I mean, it's only the 1st, but there's already who knows how many shootings by now. There's been more than 10, I know, shootings. Still hard to believe, huh?
It is.
What do you have anything to say to maybe even school officials, since you're not able to actually go into the schools and say, hey, what do you suggest for maybe people who are there dealing with the students at a daily basis?
Well, the first thing that I would want to say to school officials is they're doing a pretty awesome job. So they don't necessarily, although they're part of the conversation, they don't necessarily make the rules around gun control or metal detectors. And so school administrators are doing a really good job of getting school counselors on board and having conversations with students, of minimizing bullying, of making students feel comfortable in talking about bullying pretty openly if they see it or if they experience it. I would just say that we just got to press on. You know, we have to add to that. We have to continue to look at the research. We have to continue to look at the risk factors. We have to continue to get people who are qualified and licensed to come in and be part of the conversation so that we can identify these children and get them help.
I guess it depends on each student, but depending on what they go through, I mean, how long is it that they may not even be able to go to school because it's just so traumatic for them?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to vary, you know, from person to person. So the school, so if we're talking about the Kentucky shooting, going back into that school is certainly going to be very traumatizing or re-traumatizing for some students. For some students, they need the normalcy, they need the routine, they need to get right back into the swing of things and not ignore what happened or be remiss in talking about it with someone, but certainly not making it a prolonged period of time where they're not doing the normal daily activities that they're used to doing.
Yeah. All right, we have Lucy on the phone. Hey, Lucy, good evening. What is your question?
Yeah, hey, I don't know. Thank you for coming on the show again, Doctor. I really do appreciate you trying to reach out to our community, and you don't have to go into these definitions, but I'm just like looking at them that some people ought to know what some terms are a little bit further before they become an armchair psychologist like me or something. But I, for one, as an adult, I refuse to accept this, and I hate hearing this, as this is the new norm. I don't want anybody to come up in a society where they think this is normal behavior. It's not. Something is gone amiss in our society, and we need to rein it back in as an adult or adults. And the kids can't do it by themselves. But one thing that I found comfort today in is hearing about the school shooting in California, is where the chief of police out there said that he's going to find out where the gun came from that the 12-year-old girl got her hands on, and if an adult's involved with the gun, that he's going after the adult. And that's a big issue with me, with these adults not being mature enough to control their weapons. But my question is, I was all taught that the clinical definition of paranoia is when the likelihood of something doesn't exist. So a lot of people bully people, and they move their stuff around, whatever petty stuff they do to bully somebody, and then the kids start calling that child paranoid. Oh, they're just paranoid, and then that's a way to focus on some kid, and that's going to be the new shooter or what. I don't want people to start profiling, their classmates, thinking, oh, that person's paranoid or whatnot. That's one thing. But the other thing is about the definition of what delusional thinking is. And do you think that, I know mental illness is connected to delusional thinking, but do you think, like depression, that delusional thinking can be learned in the home? And I'll hang up and take your response off the air. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you for your question. She packed a lot in there, but she talked about paranoia, delusional, and the definition of the terms. What would you like to respond to that?
So first, I'll talk about delusional. The last question she asked, can delusions be learned in the home? When we're talking about a clinical definition of being delusional, that's somebody who really has constructed a story that's not true. So delusions of grandeur, like I'm watching television and I maybe am watching you on the news and I think you're speaking to me because you're a prophet. I mean, that's a delusion. Certainly you can learn some eccentric thinking or values or stereotypes or violent behaviors or thought processes at home. Don't think that's necessarily the case even most of the time with school shooters, but certainly those attitudes can affect an adolescent especially, and what kinds of reactions they might have to things.
And then the paranoia, people identifying people just being paranoid when they're talking about bullying, that can also be somewhat, you got to be careful with something like that.
Yeah, so she was alluding to stigmatizing a victim of bullying by calling them paranoid. So if a child or adolescent is being bullied and somebody's moving their things around or stealing their lunch or doing things like that, and then peers start saying, oh, that person's just paranoid, that's not an accurate definition of paranoia. Paranoia is, as she mentioned, it's when you truly believe something's happening, but it's actually not. So if a person is being victimized and bullied and they're paranoid that they're going to get hurt, that's not paranoia. I mean, that's just being cautious and a little bit of forethought into what might actually happen to them.
Which brings back to what you said before. It's like watching out for those signs, especially I can imagine for teachers. I guess if they have this inclination of something's going on, how can you properly go up to that student, or who may talk to their parents? I mean, what's a good way to approach that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we can't stigmatize a victim and say, now we're going to focus on this victim because this person's likely going to become violent. So now we're going to, bring in all of the psychologists and school counselors and look at this person because he or she is being bullied. So first of all, in a bullying situation, we have to ensure that the victim feels safe. And we have to really confront the bullies. And so that's the first line of defense. We have to make sure that it is identified, that the bullies are aware that they've been caught, and that we're impeding and not letting that happen again. So when we're talking about a victim maybe who's been bullied and then eventually down the road becomes violent, we have to stop that process at the beginning.
We just did a recent alleged bullying incident in Williamson County just this week alone. So it's all this connection. It's this web of just different attitudes and different personalities that hopefully does not culminate into something severe like what we saw in Marshall County. But again, it all goes back to identifying those signs and not just sitting behind and just watching things play out, which can obviously lead to something destructive.
That's right. And also, if there aren't necessarily signs, like I said, there have been school shooters who are very charismatic, homecoming king, that kind of thing. If they mention anything, I want to join the mafia, that kind of thing, we need to be listening for those types of signs as well. All
right. Thank you for the questions. Make sure, keep them coming in. We'll be here for still for the next 30 minutes. If you have any questions, 615-737+. We'll have much more after the break.